moving from survive to thrive.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Sorry.
You know, I was struck at all the tables and in this conversation with how aware and how grounded everybody is in the model, and how you can bring it back to your various groups and enlarge the mission, perhaps. But one of the things I think of a lot is the larger theory that you could be developing both individually and as a group into not just social entrepreneurship, but the whole larger area of theoretical considerations of organization and of community. And so I haven't heard too much in that direction yet, but I did hear thrusts in that direction. And I'm thinking, out of this group and any future such groups, there could be a real groundwork laid for much larger theory. And I would encourage you to think like that, even if it's not in your most immediate interest. I'm sure most of you are thinking ahead to your doctorate and finishing. But at some point, I think I can't tell you, it's exciting to have really good theory because it enlarges then everybody's separate work. So it's just my thought.
Thank you, Michael.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So on our table, there was a conversation that had to do with collaboration versus competition. And then the story went into talking about strengths and finding your passion. And there was one comment that really stuck out to me, and it said, change is where your passion is. And I thought that was really insightful.
We don't have any more final comments. Do we have any more final comments in this section? I think we're going to move on to our second to last portion. I know everybody's getting a little tired. It's late. I'm tired too. Believe me. Where we're going to talk a little bit about design, and that's kind of how we could possibly map this out. So I want to give this over to John. He's going to explain a little bit more, and then we'll kind of
Thank you, Michael. And again, as Michael mentioned, we're going into the design process, and we would like to have you share in some detail some of the discussions that you've heard in reference to how we can make this happen. And when I say how we can make it happen, some of the discussions you had, some of the ideas, some of the thoughts were brought to the table, some of the things that you maybe really gravitated towards, and ultimately, how as we as a collective group, as a community, can engage together to allow such progress to move forward. So I want to see if anyone's maybe willing to share some thoughts on that front. Again, any takeaways from some of the discussions and aha moments that occurred during those times together.
So, I'll join in. The Engaged Scholarship, there was a conversation, and I believe his name is Eddie Jones. He spoke about how there's all of these different scholars with all of these different pockets of knowledge, but then how scattered it is. So an action step, we could possibly take forums like this with the engaged scholars and actually present this information. His community that was mentioned was Northside. So let's take this same type of concept into the communities and present it in the manner that we're doing right now. So we're not trying to take anything from you. We're just trying to be here and be a part and join in however our knowledge, our data that we didn't pull from you to get or none of that. And actually, as Ms. Tracy was talking about, how can we really put the action to all that we do know?
Thank you, Danielle. Does anyone else like to share some concepts or reference to some thoughts based on the process of design? Okay, Michael.
So one of the things that really just struck out to me, and this was a comment that was just made recently about the difference between collaboration and competition, and how can we as community leaders, as social entrepreneurs, engaged scholars, have those conversations. I seem to run into those types of conversations at least on a weekly basis about how organizations have traditionally butted heads against each other for a multitude of reasons. And the biggest thing that we really need to figure out is ways that we can work together. And that's the great thing about having forums like these, and then other opportunities where we all come into the room, because one, it lets us know who is in the room, who is in the space that we're working in, and two, we can start to identify where the gaps are. So maybe I'm really good at something else, at one thing, you're good at something else, so maybe I should get out your way and let you do your thing, and then we can feed into each other. So those are just one of the, that was one thing that that really struck to me, and I get on this soapbox all the time, so I just feel like I just have to put it out there real quick.
Trish?
Because I had the benefit of hearing so many groups, I wanted to point something out about design. So in a conversation around community engagement, I heard Michelle talk about let's get people in a meeting. People are always busy. They're always going to a meeting, and you don't see change. And then I heard another group at the community engagement table, different parties, and they were saying that in order to see change, community engagement has to serve as an asset, a transfer of power and resources. And you have to become an asset and an appropriate resource. So in terms of the answer for design, I'm bridging those two separate conversations together. And the design is, how do you go from the meeting mindset to the actual transformation? So one of the community leaders that I know in Homewood, Fred Brown, talks about the change from being transactional to transformational. And so how do you go about that process? And so that speaks to me in terms of design.
Thank you, Trish. Does anyone else care to share thoughts on that front? We are going to segue to our last.
One thought about design. There was a comment I made earlier about inviting different types of people to the table. Perhaps it's the software engineer who might look at a problem from a different lens. And we discussed the Forbes Funds and BNY Mellon and their Uprise, where they're inviting entrepreneurs to think about social solutions to social issues. So I think looking outside of the nonprofit sector, outside of the academic world, to people who are more entrepreneurial, who might bring a different perspective to the table.
Thank you for those points, Michelle. Much appreciated. So we're going to segue now to our final segment, and Michael is going to speak about the delivered.
So this section, this last piece of the appreciative inquiry, it has a couple of different names. Right now we're calling it delivered, but some would call it destiny, some would call it legacy. And so what we want to look at is, not only are we talking about, kind of like how we talked about design, what are some of those things that we can do, but what do we want to see? What do we want to see in the future? What do we want to see 5-10 years down the road? And what are some of those things that we can do tomorrow? If not tonight, we're all going home. I hope. But what are some of those things that we can do immediately in the short term that can build towards these long-term goals? What are some long-term goals that we could come up with?
Thank you. So at the social entrepreneurship table, one of the conceptual frameworks that'll stick with me is the distinction between talking at people and talking with people. And I felt like that's powerful because when we look forward and think about change, it changes the way in which we look at solving problems, whether it's social or entrepreneurship or otherwise, because it brings into context the people around us.
When Eddie was talking about happiness, he was saying that the most important thing you can do is to develop relationships. When you're on your deathbed, people aren't asking about your 401k. They're saying, you know, where's my mom, where's my dad, or my kids, or whatever. And I think the same is what happens when you're dealing with difficulties or when you're dealing with change. It is about developing relationships. When you develop relationships with the people that you're with, you come to know your strengths and your weaknesses. And then I know what I can pull from Quincy to be able to be more effective. You look at the people that you're serving and you see them as people and you develop a relationship with them so that you really hear the heart of their need. And then you have a desire to see them not just survive but thrive. And so I think relationship, even coming together in something like this, it's like, oh my goodness, you know, I learned from so many of you and just listening to what you said. So I think relationship is a rich thing to bring to the table.
We're all in work that is very compassionate, very caring, very giving. We deposit into others, we deposit into our communities, and just from a health standpoint, to get to that destination.